Hello and welcome to this webinar on how to cope with bereavement. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Johanna and I'm a business psychologist at Thrive. With me I have Emily Cook. Hi Emily.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining.
Hi. So this session will be around 45 minutes with time for 15 minutes Q&A in the end. And if you would like to ask any question during the webinar, feel free to write it in the Q&A section and we will either come to it in the end or Emily will interrupt me and answer your questions. So this session will be recorded for those who are not able to attend the webinar or would like to listen to it again at a later point of time. So today we will cover bereavement stages of grief, how grief affects us, how to cope with it, when we should seek support, and how we could best support someone we care about who is grieving. So what is bereavement? The death of a loved one is one of the greatest sorrows that can occur in one's life. So bereavement is the state or experience of losing someone we care or love. It may also be other changes like the end of a relationship, moving to a new place, or watching someone else we care about declining in their health. So for example, seeing a relative fighting with cancer. We may also realize that we are in the middle of this collective bereavement. So we are losing something, we are all losing something now. Many people are reckoning with individual losses, including illness and death due to the coronavirus, or loss of employment as a result of the economic upheaval. But even people who haven't lost anything so concrete as a job or a loved one are affected. So we are in a communal bereavement as we may watch our work, healthcare, or the education and economic system, all of these like systems we depend on destabilize. So what is grief? Grief is the emotional, cognitive and behavioral response to loss. So it's similar to depression in many ways. However, grief is a natural reaction to losing someone close to us. So grief can be difficult and stressful, and nearly everybody goes through it at some point in our lives. So despite this, it can be very difficult to predict how we might react to a loss, as it's a very individual process. So what I mean with that is that people react differently to bereavement. Losing a parent may cause a different emotional reaction in yourself than it does in your brother or a friend of your parents. So some may seem completely unaffected or even more active than normal, and others may break down and can't even get out of bed for days. So emotions may come and go unexpectedly, and these emotions can fluctuate between acceptance and denial. So it's important to know that there's no right or wrong way to process the loss of someone. So the best we can do is to let our minds work through it and give ourselves the time and compassion to do it in peace.
Yeah, Johanna, if I can jump in there, I think what you said at the beginning is something really important to drive home, that grief is obviously an emotional response, and you notice that it can be similar to depression in many ways, but it's really important to understand that grief is a healthy response, whereas depression is in many ways an unhealthy reaction. So if grief is actually suppressed and you don't give yourself the opportunity to process those emotions in the right way, it can lead to an unhealthy reaction, which can cause more serious issues down the line. So it's really important to have that distinction.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Thanks, Emily. So stages of grief. There's a common opinion that we experience grief in a general pattern. So some of us may move through different stages as we experience grief, or have to accomplish different tasks which we have to go through during the grieving process. So some people talk about the stages of grief as shock or denial, the overwhelming chaos of emotions, including anger, guilt, despair, the flatness and feeling of depression that comes with the realization that it is the reality of what has happened. However, stages of grief are not set in stone, so many people don't go through all of them, and many people can move back and forth between different stages, and they each may take a different amount of time for different people. So there's not a specific time where people feel a specific emotions or a specific stage. It's all individual and all to just a different time. So acceptance. The acceptance stage is when we are trying to come to terms with what has actually happened. So some of us might experience thoughts like, if only I had done more, or this is not fair. And here some people go through a period of denial, bargaining, anger, perplexity, shock, and confusion at first, while some people accept it right away. So the shock provides emotional protection from becoming overwhelmed, especially during the early stages of grief, and it can last a long time. And you might find that you feel numb after loss. So this is natural as well, and helps us to process what has happened at a pace that we can manage, and not before we are ready. So it's natural and can be a helpful stage. The only problem being if numbness is the only thing we feel, and none of the other feelings associated with grief, as this can cause a feel of stuck or being frozen. So in this stage, the person we lost is still present in our habits and thoughts, and we might find ourselves saying hello to an empty house, or setting the table for the person who has passed on. So every time this happens, it hurts, and it is a reminder of the loss whenever we realize what we are doing and what the reality is. At the end of this stage, we have managed to accept that the loss is real. So experiencing the pain, so this might lead to the hardest stage of all. The pain of grief can be so bad that some of us may only feel anger, guilt, high distress, hopelessness, regrets, or even suppress it completely in order to protect ourselves from fully experiencing the emotions and the intense feeling of loss. So at this stage, it's very important to let ourselves go through whatever we have to go through, because only then we will be able to fully accept what we have, that we have to move on. So it's completely okay to feel tired, hopeless, like you have lost perspective, or you need to be alone or just around others, and having thoughts like everything is a struggle or what's the point. So this is all normal, and you don't have to be afraid of that. We have to try to be patient and compassionate with ourselves during this time. As these emotions subside, we start adjusting to the new reality. So this often means building new habits, finding new interests, or forming new relationships, and even moving somewhere else can be a way. So this stage can be still very hard, and the adjustment process can still bring back memories which rekindle the pain of the loss. So finally, we start to put less emotional energy into the grieving and adjusting, and we start to find new things that occupy our lives. So we start to acknowledge the implications of the loss and the new circumstances, and prepare ourselves to move forward in new directions. So what I mean with that, we are finally ready to move on, but that doesn't mean that we won't miss the person we lost. We will definitely, and it also doesn't mean that we won't feel the grief when something reminds us of them. So this is all normal, and our memories will more often give us comfort than pain in this stage.
I think as well, Johanna, some people at this point struggle with feeling guilty,
Yeah.
and a lot of people can get stuck in a position where they don't feel like they can move on because they feel guilty that, you know, they've lost someone that they love and they care about, and so why should they move on and be happy? And this is where you can get really stuck into a bit of a vicious cycle. But it's really important that this stage is something that you are able to achieve, whether it be yourself or with the help from others.
Yeah, and just accepting how you feel. It's completely okay to feel guilty or angry or anything, what you just feel. It's all normal, and we all have different feelings to loss. So just try to allow yourself to feel these emotions, which are really important to, yeah, just accept the loss in the end. So how does grief affect us? Grief can affect us in three key components. So it involves the emotions and its challenges, which we experience, the behavior response, and the physical manifestation. So grief may also cause physical and mental illnesses. There's no right or wrong how someone should feel, as I said before, and we might be affected by loss, as we all have our individual way of coping with the bereavement. So in other words, how grief affects us varies greatly from one person to the next because of various factors, like the variability in the individual circumstances, like the type of relationship. So for example, parents, being a child, friends, sibling, the strength of attachment or intimacy of the person who died, the situation surrounding the death, like the type of loss. So for example, sudden or unanticipated or like natural versus suicide, accident, or the number of losses as well, and the amount of time spent anticipating the death, individuals' interpretation, their personality, unique vulnerabilities, their age and health. Also, the spirituality and cultural identity influences our way of how we cope with loss. And yeah, a key factor is also resources and support. So they really change how we cope with loss. So emotional challenges in grief. This four-stage process, which I mentioned before, can be very emotional, and the stages are not necessarily following each other in neat order. So we may jump back and forth between them, and the accompanying emotions may just fluctuate widely. So the most common emotion, of course, is deep sadness, which we experience, and we can also find ourselves crying frequently, feeling absolutely exhausted for seemingly no reason. So there are other emotions that don't tend to be part of the grieving process. And it's important to recognize that whatever we feel during the period is likely connected to our underlying pain. So as such, it might not necessarily be wise to act on them. So what I mean with that is, for instance, we might feel intense anger or feel irritable. Losing somebody is painful and can seem an unfair thing to happen. So you might find that you feel angry or frustrated and want to find something or someone to blame for the loss, so that you can try to make sense of it. This is still normal, but it's important to set our heads straight by trying to keep in mind that our anger may not be about the person we are angry with, and the anger might also be directed at ourselves or at the person who has passed away. So when this type of emotion occurs, it is important to take time to think through it and explore where it comes from. So if we do this, we might realize it's actually sadness, that it's so overwhelming that it becomes something else. And it's best to try not to act on our angry feelings until we are sure they are justified. So really reflect on that and identify the cause of your emotion. We may also feel overwhelming guilt. And many often blame themselves when a loved one passes away. So this is what Emily just mentioned. And this is very important, this is very common, and the emotion is perfectly normal. And it's also important to understand that it's almost never justified. And many of us may feel guilty for things we never said or never did when we had a chance, or perhaps for the things we did but shouldn't have done. So no relationship is perfect, and however, it's important not to let guilt consume us or consume you. And if this feeling is too strong, we might need some outside support to get through it, and it might be an indicator that we need the attention of a professional. So we can feel all or none, or just some of these things. And as I said before, there's no right or wrong way to feel following a loss. So some people seek help immediately by showing their emotions and talking to people. Others prefer to deal with things slowly or quietly or by themselves for the time being. Typical grief-related behaviors can include restless or pacing, searching behaviors, or forgetfulness and loss of concentration. So many people struggle with sleep and often finding it difficult to settle or finding themselves waking early. People in grief may lose interest entirely in the things they normally enjoy and may begin to neglect their own health and relationships with those around them. And yet some people may want to avoid all company, while others don't want to be alone at all. So yeah, there are very different ways how we act on our feeling of loss. So in the case of sudden death, the physical effects of stress and anxiety related symptoms can be profound. So nightmares or disturbed dreams can be common, as can intrusive images or flashbacks, and often leading to weight changes, tiredness, which interfere with our ability to care for ourselves. Yeah, as I said, the anxiety symptoms, which include unconscious bodily responses caused by a flight or fight response to threats, such as stomach ache or heart racing, shallow breathing, shaking, being hypersensitive to noise, or just panic attacks. So sometimes even like physical ill health can be a symptom of grief, as our immune system is strongly affected by stress and the stress hormone cortisol, which is released during this process. So all of these feelings, thoughts, sensations, and behaviors are completely normal, as I really try to point out. And it's important to recognize that you need to take care and look after yourself more than you would normally do. So how to cope with bereavement? There's no way to tell how long the grieving process will last, but generally it may take from 12 to 24 months. So most people consider it over when thoughts of the person we lost are no longer daily, or if they are no longer associated with the deep pain which we experienced before. So they may change the comforting, pleasant memories of the good times we had with them. As it may take a long time, it can be helpful to talk to people we trust and who may be able to help us reflect and give us the support and share our experiences. It's also helpful to share the grief with others who also knew the person who we lost, and support each other throughout the grieving process. So you don't have to be best friend with someone to connect with them. Ask yourself what your preferred support system might be. So maybe it's helpful to reach out for your community, including family, friends, colleagues, or just online groups. So this really helps you to realize that you're not alone and you don't have to cope with bereavement by yourself.
One thing I would say here is just to be, online groups can be really helpful, but you also have to be careful about which ones you join, because there are some instances where online groups can actually be a bit of a breeding ground for negative information, which can actually start to add to the negative emotions you're feeling. So just be mindful of, if you do reach out to online groups, just make sure that they are from sort of a reputable source, and if you see any information that isn't necessarily helpful, then I wouldn't engage with them further. Just one thing to say.
Yeah, no, that's a good point actually. So self-care is really important to keep ourselves functioning. Try to sleep enough, eat regular and healthy meals, and do not use alcohol or drugs to numb your feelings. Alcohol and drugs tend to make it difficult in the longer term for you to manage your feelings. So please don't. Rather try to go for a walk or read a book or do some physical movements. Just, yeah, pick a healthy choice of distraction and don't go for alcohol and drugs.
Many people turn to alcohol and drugs during times like this because in the time they make you feel better, but actually alcohol particularly is a depressant, so it may make you feel more relaxed and calm and happy at the point that you're drinking it or intoxicated, but the next day it can have a real profound effect. And if anyone has ever experienced that before, you can start to see a bigger change in your mood. So if you are experiencing different emotions associated with grief, then alcohol and drugs can actually exacerbate those even further.
Yeah. So grief can be painful and exhausting, but most people find that in time things become easier. So understanding the grief process and the common stages of grief cycle can be really helpful for you. So it can be a good idea to familiarize yourself with these and keep them in mind during the periods when difficult feelings come up. So take each day at a time. There might be a good day, there might be bad days, and really try to focus on each day at a time and set yourself small, achievable goals. You can also make yourself like a memory box of the person you lost. You might find it helpful to fill a box with items with prompt happy memories of the person who died. So this can help to lift your mood when you feel down. So the box can contain anything that's meaningful and helpful to you. So like a favorite book or a picture, letter, poems, notes to yourself, just maybe the perfume or the smell that's important to you. It's just like small things which you might find helpful. Learn your triggers, and this is really important. So it's normal for certain things to trigger difficult feelings or painful memories about the loss. So by taking note of what causes your mood to change, you can gradually learn how to best cope with triggers when they happen. So you can try tracking your feelings using an online mood journal, which is available, for example, in the Thrive app. Also, don't judge yourself. So it's completely okay and normal to grieve and mourn. It's also normal to have a hard time accepting the loss. So really allow yourself the time, have patience with yourself, and maybe make a self-care box for times when you're struggling or loss overwhelms you, like yeah, just a nice movie or yeah, your favorite video clips, anything. Just yeah, just something which helps you in the moment to yeah, distract yourself a bit and to make you feel better. Important to mention here is we are not always able to cope with our grief on our own, so don't be afraid to ask for help. It's completely fine. So when to seek help, while grieving can be an unpredictable process with changeable, intense emotions, it shouldn't overwhelm us completely. So sometimes bereavement can be so powerful that it may cause a lasting effect on our mental health. And during the earlier stages, we might accept a higher level of distress and dysfunction. but this should not continue for too long. So if this happens, we would likely need some additional help, potentially from a therapist, for example. And there are counselors who specialize in grief, who can really offer expert guidance through the process. And yeah, just talking with a trained professional can help you become more aware and address your thoughts and feelings following the loss. So it can be useful to have a continuous focus source of support that goes beyond the level of support that friends and family may be able to provide you with at this moment. Some of the things to watch out are, for example, being unable to sleep for long periods, not being able to get out of bed, and feeling you cannot go on without the person you've lost anymore. So not being able to function at work and neglecting yourself and others, other people in an ongoing way. So this neglectance is a really important point. There are various options available where you could inform yourself or seek support. So for example, the NHS has some information, just search for bereavement on their website. Also, there's a charity called Cruise that specializes in bereavement support. Just visit their website, www.cruise.org.uk. So this is a really helpful website, and they actually have some points during the Corona time as well, so how you could support yourself during Corona time and social isolation. So yeah, just check them out. They have really helpful advices. And they have a helpline as well, so if you feel you want to talk to someone. So how to support someone else if you're not the person who's grieving, but for example, your partner or your friend. Let the person know that you care about them and that you're listening, and be honest. Acknowledge the news by, for example, sharing your condolence, saying how sorry you are, and that the friend or relative has died. So share your thoughts about the person who died. Obviously, if appropriate, tell your friend or relative how much the person will be missed, and that you're thinking of them, and really remind them that you are there for them as much as you can. So sending a card, text, or email can mean the world to the grieving person. And really don't worry about the right words. So the feeling will come across, and it's really more important that you say something that you find than that you find the perfect words. The person will definitely appreciate it. Listen and don't judge. So please remember that it's not personal if your partner or friend would rather be left alone or spend some time off. And it's not because the person does not like to be with you anymore. It's just maybe the only accessible coping mechanism for the time being. So if you accept that, you are already very supportive. However, if you feel that your friend or partner is at risk for themselves or for their children, you may ignore their wish for loneliness and really encourage professional support for the person. So yeah, be aware of the line of risk and neglectance. Encourage self-management. So this is also really important. Outline the importance of physical exercise, eating a balanced diet, and the routine, getting up every day out of bed and doing something. And yeah, really getting enough rest with sleep. So having still the normal sleep, which the grieving person really needs. And give the grieving person time. So yeah, as I mentioned before, grieving and can just take really long, and really allow the person the time, and don't push them that they have to move on right now because you think it's time. Another really important aspect is to take care of yourself. So even though your partner or friend might isolate themselves, try to keep up with seeing your friends and family. And it's important that you keep in mind that you cannot make up for the loss, but offer him or her the support to the level you still feel you can cope with your own life. So really don't blame yourself if you cannot cope with this situation anymore. And yeah, just allow yourself to ask for consent to seek professional support or seek support for yourself maybe. And yeah, it's really not a betrayal if you join a support group or talk to a counselor or coach about your emotions and feelings and that you're overwhelmed and maybe yeah, just don't know anymore how you could support the person or the grieving person. Yeah, so we touched on various things. So on grief and the grieving cycle, what you should do, how to cope with loss, how you can support someone who is grieving. And yeah, if you have any questions right now, please feel free to ask us. I think it's just really important to remember that we all have individual ways in how we cope with loss and how we react on our loss and what emotions we experience. So really don't think that it's not okay to feel guilty or that it's not okay to feel hopeless for the time being. Allow yourself time and really be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I think that was really good and helpful information that I'm sure a lot of people will find useful. We'll be sending out a copy of the recording